Thanks to you at home for joining me this hour. Happy holidays. Happy almost 2024. It will soon be 3 years since Donald Trump's efforts to overthrow the 2020 election culminated in a violent mob storming the U.S. Capitol. For a few weeks, Trump was an outcast. A political comeback seemed far-fetched, almost impossible to imagine. And yet, thanks to his allies in Congress and the MAGA movement on whole, Donald Trump has emerged here at the end of 2023, not merely a rehabilitated politician, but as the undisputed leader of his party. Now, Trump began this year as the prohibitive favorite for the Republican presidential nomination. Even in January, he had a monster 20-point national lead over his closest rival, Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis. And in the months since, Trump's lead has only widened. At this point, a rematch against Joe Biden appears almost inevitable. And yet, while Trump's march towards the Republican nomination this year was mostly interrupted, there has been, for the last 12 months, an X factor that he has had to contend with, a series of criminal investigations. As the year began, Trump was the subject of criminal cases in New York and Georgia, as well as two separate federal investigations led by the recently appointed special counsel, Jack Smith. Remember, when this year began, we were all talking about whether the former president would be indicted. It was definitely not a sure thing, and it was a long time coming. But then, as spring turned to summer, it rained indictments.
We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
We have one set of laws in this country, and they apply to everyone.
A criminal conspiracy to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election.
My office will seek a speedy trial so that our evidence can be tested in court and judged by a jury of citizens.
As the year closes out, Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, has been charged with 91 felony counts in 4 criminal indictments. But with each new indictment, Trump has actually increased his support. Trump began the year with the support of about half of Republican primary voters nationwide. And as we head into 2024, that number has risen to about 2/3 of the party's primary electorate. And with less than 3 weeks until the Iowa caucuses, it has become abundantly clear that the rest of the Republican field will not stop Trump. His closest rivals have gone to extraordinary lengths to avoid attacking him. Instead, the nominating campaign has become a sort of circular firing squad with Trump on the outside of it. Even with 2016 in the rearview mirror, there hasn't really been any concerted effort to coalesce around a Trump alternative. And so in purely political terms, Donald Trump is back within a coin flip of the presidency. As for the legal processes, the X factor in all this, we began this year wondering whether Trump would be indicted, and we end it wondering whether Trump will actually face trial next year. As the threat of criminal prosecution has increased, Trump has responded with threats directed towards both prosecutors and his political enemies. He has embraced authoritarian rhetoric on the campaign trail, drawing parallels to the worst of the 20th century's fascist dictators. Whether that language is evidence of fear or whether it's merely a political tool to rile up his base, what is obvious is that Donald Trump does not want to stand trial. For months, Trump has deployed every tool in his legal arsenal to delay judgment. Before this year even began, he succeeded in getting Florida Federal District Judge Aileen Cannon to appoint a special master, which set the Mar-a-Lago documents case back for months. His recent maneuvers suggest that scheduled May trial may not actually be held until after the 2024 election. And in his D.C. federal election interference case, Trump's numerous appeals have resulted in a prolonged pause in that trial and may end up delaying its scheduled March 4th start date for some time. So when these historic federal criminal trials actually begin, well, that is a very open question. And then, of course, there is the question of what happens when Donald Trump is found innocent or when he is found guilty. And if that judgment comes when he is outside of the White House or back inside the Oval Office. 2023 has been an historic year. The rule of law has been tested in ways unseen in American history. But wow, does 2024 look like it's going to be an even greater challenge to the basic foundations of our democracy. Here goes nothing. Joining me now is former Missouri Senator and current MSNBC political analyst, Claire McCaskill. Claire, thanks for being here. It's hard to even remember everything that we've lived through this year, and yet I have a sinking feeling that it pales in comparison to what is ahead of us. How are you thinking about the year behind us and the year ahead?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's important to remember that a lot of Democrats lost confidence when Donald Trump won in 2016. Because, truth be known, no one thought Donald Trump would win, including Donald Trump. And when he did win, there was it kind of shook the foundations of everyone believing that, well, you can't do and say those kinds of things and be president. That's not what we are in America. Well, it turns out that you can. And not only did he say those things before he got elected president, he kept acting that way the entire time, busting norm after norm, cozying up to the worst leaders on the planet, people who do not believe in freedom, people who do not believe in human rights. Everything he did would lead one to believe that, of course, he wouldn't get reelected. And then he almost did. And now you see January 6th and all these criminal indictments, and you say, well, of course he can't win again. And the polling would indicate that all of this has made him stronger. So it's understandable that people are really worried about next year. It's also true that Donald Trump did not win the popular vote in 2016, and he did not win in 2020. And when he has been pushing candidates on the ballot, most of them have lost, and his party has lost ground since he became a leader. So everybody needs to take a deep breath, say Happy New Year to everyone, realize that this is in the hands of the American people, and we can do something about it by making sure that someone takes office that respects the Constitution and doesn't vow to terminate the Constitution.
I noticed that you said this is in the hands of the American people. You did not say this is in the hands of the American judicial system. Does that reflect a belief on your part that there is not actually going to be a criminal trial for Trump that is resolved before the election?
I think Jack Smith is going to try very hard. I think the Supreme Court is probably going to move with some haste on the cases that will be in front of them. But understand this, Alex, if these cases are not tried, if none of them are tried, and if Donald Trump wins, then the federal cases go away. And then we have another crisis. We have a crisis that if he appoints an attorney general on the promise that the attorney general will dismiss these cases against him that are federal, the Mar-a-Lago documents case and the obstruction case in Washington, D.C., both being handled by Jack Smith. If he says my attorney general is going to dismiss them, that attorney general has to get confirmed by the Senate. So now all of a sudden we have to worry about the Senate elections and whether or not the Senate will confirm an attorney general who has promised to ignore the law and the facts and prop up someone who is doing everything they can to run for president and stay out of prison. And I'm not sure which is more important to him at this point.
Are you at all concerned? I mean, we talked in recent closing weeks of this year about how Trump, if elected, could do an end run around the guardrails, effectively just not even looking for Senate confirmation, but just appointing acting attorney generals, appointing acting cabinet secretaries, people from the fringes of the MAGA movement who might not otherwise be qualified or get confirmation. Does that and how worried should people be about that potential future?
I think people should be worried. I think they should be worried that we have a lot of people in this country that are okay with someone who says he will terminate the Constitution and talks about executing generals and putting journalists out of business and shutting down networks. I think people should be very concerned about that. On the other hand, we still have the court system. And so really this year will tell us a lot about our court system. So far, this Supreme Court, even though it's dominated by conservatives and 3 of them were appointed by Donald Trump, they have said no to Donald Trump many times. Donald Trump thought they would put him in power after January 6th, or after the election, that they would somehow help overturn the election on his behalf. They did not. And so the courts are going to be tested, but they will have opportunities, both in this next year and if he were elected president, to stand the ground and hold the line on the law in this country. And it will be interesting to see what happens before the election as to whether or not the court's actions help Donald Trump, which so far, him being accountable under the law has helped him politically, or whether it will hurt Donald Trump because the weight of evidence will finally break through to those low information swing voters in the states that will decide the presidency.
Claire McCaskill, it's great to end the year with you, Claire. I am excited, a bit trepidatious, and somewhat terrified for the next one. Thank you, as always, for riding along with me.
Well, we'll be there together next year.
We will, sister.